They sat us down on the floral sofa, the one that always smelled faintly of lemon polish and dust. Mom and Dad, they weren't holding hands. They sat a whole cushion apart, an empty space that felt like a canyon. My mother, Eleanor, stared at a spot on the wall just over my head. My father, his eyes red-rimmed, looked right at us. He was the one who spoke. The words were a language I didn't understand, but I knew the meaning. Words like separate, different homes, still love you. It was like listening to a foreign film without subtitles. You can't grasp the specifics, but you can't mistake the tragedy. Leo, ever the protective older brother, put his arm around me. I remember looking at his small, determined face and thinking he was the only solid thing left in the world. Dad packed a single, large suitcase. It looked like a deflated lung as he dragged it to the front door. He knelt down, and this time, the smell of his aftershave, that familiar scent of cedar and spice, was mixed with the salt of his tears. He hugged us so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and the silence that rushed in to fill the space was a physical presence. It was heavy. It was cold. In the days that followed, our mother became a ghost in her own home. She'd be there, physically, but the part of her that made her mom was gone. The warmth had been extinguished. She moved through the house with a sigh always waiting on her lips, a slow leak of unhappiness. Dinners were silent affairs, the clinking of our forks against the plates the only conversation. The TV became our third parent, its blue light a poor substitute for the warmth of a bedtime story or a shared joke. She was struggling. I could see that even as a child, but her struggle made her an island, and we were adrift in the sea around her, with no way to reach the shore. We had lost our father, and in the aftershock, it felt like we had lost her, too. The silence lasted for 6 months. 6 months of tiptoeing around a grief that had no name, of watching our mother stare out the window as if waiting for a different life to arrive. And then, one day, it did. His name was Marcus. He was tall, with a smile that seemed professionally engineered to be reassuring. And he wasn't alone. Standing slightly behind him, clutching his hand, was a little boy with wide, curious eyes. His name was Noah, and he was 5. Maya, Leo, our mother said, and her voice. It was different. It was lighter, a frequency we hadn't heard in half a year. This is my friend, Marcus, and this is his son, Noah. The change in her was instantaneous and breathtaking. It was like watching a black and white film suddenly burst into technicolor. She knelt down to Noah's level, her smile a real, crinkle-eyed smile beaming at him. "Well, hello there, Noah," she cooed, her voice dripping with the honeyed sweetness we'd been starved of. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you." Noah, shy but clearly charmed, mumbled a hello. And just like that, the gravitational center of our universe shifted. All the attention, all the warmth, all the maternal energy that had been locked away from us was suddenly lavished upon this small stranger. Leo and I stood on the periphery, watching this performance. It was a masterclass in motherhood, and we were the forgotten students who had already failed the course. The ultimate symbol of our displacement came a week later. My father's office, his sanctuary, the room that still held the phantom scent of his pipe tobacco and old leather-bound books, was to be Noah's bedroom. We watched as movers carried out Dad's heavy oak desk, his worn armchair, his shelves of history books. Then came the painters. The deep, forest green walls were covered in a cheerful, sterile sky blue. A small, race car-shaped bed was assembled, where Dad's desk used to be. Every brushstroke, every turn of a screwdriver was an act of erasure. They weren't just renovating a room, they were systematically demolishing a shrine, paving over a memory. Our mother oversaw it all with a bright, focused energy. This was her new project. This was her new beginning. And we, her children from a past she was desperate to escape, were just part of the old decor she hadn't yet figured out how to discard. Life settled into a new, uneasy rhythm. There was the A family and the B family, all living under one roof. The A family was Mom, Marcus, and Noah. They were the main feature. They laughed. They planned weekend trips. They were building a future. Leo and I were the B family. We were the relics, the holdovers from a previous administration. We orbited them, close enough to feel their heat but never allowed to be part of the fire. And then, the universe decided to throw a grenade into our fragile, fractured world. It was a Wednesday. Mom and Marcus were getting married in 3 months. The invitations, printed on thick, creamy cardstock, were sitting in a box on the dining table. I was doing my homework. Leo was in his room, listening to music too loudly. The phone rang. Mom answered it in the kitchen, her voice light. Hello? A pause. Then, her voice changed. It dropped, became flat. Yes, this is she. What? When? I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, only my mother's clipped, disbelieving responses. I saw her reach out and grip the counter, her knuckles turning white. She hung up the phone without saying goodbye, the plastic clattering into the cradle. She stood there for a full minute, her back to me, perfectly still. Then she turned, and her face was a mask of, I don't know what. It wasn't grief, not the kind I would have recognized. It was shock, annoyance, inconvenience. Maya, she said, her voice eerily calm, go get your brother. I have to tell you something. My father had been driving home from work. A truck ran a red light. It was instantaneous. They said, no suffering. They always say that, don't they? As if the speed of the final moment erases the brutality of it. As if the lack of suffering for him negates the lifetime of it that had just been handed to us. This, right here, is the piece of the mirror that will never lose its edge. The one that still cuts me, 20 years later in the haze of the funeral. Arrangements, the casseroles from sympathetic neighbors, and the gut-wrenching visit from our paternal grandparents, the Garcias. A new, horrifying topic emerged. The wedding. I found Mom on the phone with the caterer a week after the funeral. I stood in the doorway, listening. No, she was saying, with a small, apologetic laugh. Everything is still on schedule. Absolutely. We just had a bit of a family emergency, but it's all been handled. A family emergency. Handled. That's what our father's death was. A logistical hurdle. That night, Leo, with a bravery I still can't comprehend at 14, confronted her. You can't still be getting married, he said, his voice trembling but firm. Not now. It's only been, Dad is. He couldn't finish. My mother looked at him, her expression hardening. Leo, she said, her voice cold and final. Life goes on. Your father would not want us to put our lives on hold. Marcus and I, this family, we need stability. We need to move forward. The wedding is happening as planned. And it did. 3 weeks after we stood on a small patch of grass and watched our father's coffin be lowered into the earth, we were standing in a manicured garden, watching our mother marry his replacement. I wore a pale pink dress that felt like a costume. It was scratchy and foreign, Leo was in a tiny, ill-fitting suit, looking like a little man drowning in sorrow. We were the designated grief props. Our sad, little faces were the perfect backdrop to showcase our mother's resilience, her strength in the face of tragedy. See how she forges ahead. See how she creates a new, better life from the ashes of the old one. During the reception, the photographer tried to get us to smile. Big smiles, kids, he chirped, oblivious. I remember looking at my mother. She was radiant, laughing as Marcus whispered something in her ear. She was holding a glass of champagne, her new husband on one arm, her new son clinging to her other side. She glanced over at us, her smile faltering for just a second. It wasn't a look of sympathy. It was a look of impatience, a silent command. Don't ruin this for me. That was the moment the fracture became a chasm. It was no longer about her struggling to cope. It was a choice, a conscious, deliberate choice. She had chosen her new family, her fresh start, over the grieving, broken children of her past. We weren't just the beef family anymore. We were the ghosts at her feast. My father's parents, the Garcias, were our last bridge to the world that had existed before. Their house was a museum of our history. It smelled of abuela's cooking stewed chicken and sofrito and abuelo's cigars. Photos of our father, from a gap-toothed kid to a proud new dad, covered every surface. Being there felt like breathing real air after being underwater. They were our living, breathing connection to him, and they loved us with a fierce, uncomplicated devotion. After the wedding, our mother saw this connection not as a comfort, but as a threat, a competing narrative, a loyalty she couldn't control. So, she issued her decree. It was delivered over the phone, a conversation I overheard from the top of the stairs. Elena, Miguel, she said, her voice smooth and reasonable, the voice she used for business negotiations. I know how much you love Maya and Leo, but we are a family now, a complete family. If you want to take them for the weekend, that's wonderful. But you have to take Noah, too. It's not fair to him to be left out. We can't have him feeling excluded. It was a brilliant, cruel masterstroke. She knew my grandparents. She knew their grief was a raw, open wound, asking them to play happy families with the son of the man who had replaced their son was an emotional impossibility. It was like asking a widow to invite her husband's successor to a private memorial. My abuela tried. God, she tried. She explained, her voice thick with unshed tears. Eleanor, please. We are just not ready for that. Our hearts, they are broken. We need some time with just our boys' children. My mother's reply was swift and merciless. I'm sorry you feel that way, she said, the false sympathy dripping from every word. But I have to do what's best for my entire family. The offer stands. All the children, or none of them. It's your choice. It was a choice they couldn't make. And so, our mother made it for them. That was the last time we saw our grandparents for 15 years. She used their grief as a weapon against them, and then as an excuse to sever the tie completely. She told us they were being stubborn and unfair to Noah. She painted herself as the victim, the reasonable one trying to blend a family while they clung selfishly to the past. She didn't just isolate us. She made us complicit in our own quarantine, convincing us that the people who loved us most had abandoned us. With the external threats eliminated, my mother began her campaign of internal erasure. It was a quiet, insidious process of sanitizing our father's memory until it was palatable for her new life. His birthday had always been a sacred day for us. The three of us would buy a bouquet of his favorite flowers, yellow roses, and drive to the cemetery. We'd sit on the grass and tell him about our school year, our friends, our secrets. It was sad, but it was ours. It was real. The first year, after she married Marcus, she announced a new tradition. "We are all going to go out for a nice dinner to celebrate your father's life," she declared. It's what he would have wanted. So, we went to a sterile, overpriced Italian restaurant. Marcus, awkward and well-meaning, raised his glass. "To a good man," he said, "who I wish I'd had the chance to know." It was excruciating. It was a public performance of grief designed for an audience of one. Her. It turned our private, sacred ritual into a pageant of her blended family success. Leo and I just pushed pasta around our plates, the silence between us a fortress. The physical evidence of his existence began to vanish, too. It started subtly. The large, framed photo of him, holding me as a baby, the one on the living room mantelpiece, was moved to a smaller end table. A few months later, it was on the bookshelf in the hallway. Then, one day, it was gone. When I asked where it was, my mother said, "Oh, I put it away for safekeeping. It's better to not have so many sad reminders around, don't you think? We need to look forward." I found it later, in a box in the attic, face down on a stack of old tax returns. His face, his smile, his memory, deemed too sad, too inconvenient, for the bright, forward-looking future she was so desperate to build. I started my own secret museum, a showbox under my bed where I kept a few photos she'd missed, a tie of his I'd saved from the back of his closet, a small rock he'd given me from a camping trip. These were my relics, my proof that he was real, that we were real. The teenage years were a long, slow exercise in invisibility. We learned to make ourselves smaller, quieter. We were boarders in our own home, strangers at their dinner table. The house was no longer ours. It was Marcus and Eleanor's house, where Noah was being raised. We were just there, remnants of a former life they were obligated to house and feed until we aged out of the system. Marcus, to his credit, was never overtly cruel. He was just the new authority, and he had no context for who we were. He only knew us as the sullen, quiet stepkids who were part of the package. He was the one who now made decisions about our future. When I brought home a brochure for my dream college, a liberal arts school on the East Coast known for its writing program, he glanced at it with casual dismissal. "That's a long way away, Maya," he said, handing it back. "And expensive. Why don't you look at the state university? It's practical. You could live at home, save money." He wasn't trying to be malicious. In his mind, it was a perfectly logical suggestion. He didn't know that writing was the one thing that felt like my own, the one thing that connected me to my father, who had filled notebooks with his own stories. He didn't see me. He saw a line item on a budget. My mother, sitting right there, said nothing. Her silence was a tacit agreement. My dreams were impractical. My ambitions were an inconvenience. That was the moment the quiet resentment in me and Leo began to harden into a plan. We started working. I got a job at the local library, losing myself in the quiet hum of the stacks. Leo worked at a greasy spoon diner, coming home smelling of fried onions and coffee. We never spoke about it directly, but we both knew what we were doing. Every dollar we earned, every shift we worked, was a brick in the wall we were building. Between us and them, it was our escape fund, a quiet, Shared conspiracy whispered in the moments we had alone. A promise that this was not the end of our story. The day I turned 18, I felt like a prisoner on the day of their release. I had been accepted to the state university, a compromise, but it was a campus 2 hours away. It was my ticket out. I spent the summer working 2 jobs, saving every penny. My moving day was a quiet, anticlimactic affair. My mother helped me pack a few boxes, a strange, detached politeness between us. There were no tears, no emotional farewells. As I loaded the last box into my beat-up car, she gave me a brief, stiff hug. "Call once a week," she said. It wasn't a request. It was an instruction. "I will." I lied and Marcus shook my hand. "Be smart," he said. Leo helped me with everything, his presence a silent, solid support. He hugged me tightly before I got in the car. "6 months," he whispered. "Then I'm right behind you." As I drove away, I watched them in my rearview mirror. Mom, Marcus, and a now teenage Noah standing on the porch, a perfect family portrait. My mother gave a small, final wave and then turned to go back inside, her duty done. The indifference was more painful than any argument could have been. I wasn't leaving a hole in their lives. I was simply vacating a room. And the relief I felt, as their house shrank in the distance, was so profound, so absolute, it almost scared me. It was the feeling of a diver breaking the surface, taking that first, desperate gasp of air. For the next 5 years, our relationship existed through a series of shallow, perfunctory phone calls. I'd call on holidays, on her birthday. We'd talk about the weather, my classes, her work. We never talked about anything real. It was a carefully maintained illusion of a relationship. Leo moved out, as promised, and our contact with her became a shared, low-maintenance chore. We were free, but we were also untethered, floating in a self-imposed exile, the ghosts of a family that had never truly been ours. I was 23. I had my own apartment, a job I didn't hate, and a life I had built for myself, piece by painful piece. The phone calls with my mother were a predictable, 10-minute ritual every other Sunday. But this call was different. I answered, and I could hear the anger in her voice before she even said my name. "Maya," she said, her voice tight. "I just got off the phone with Noah. He said you couldn't make it to his graduation party this weekend." "I have to work, Mom," I said. My standard, easy excuse. "I can't get out of it." "You can always get out of it if you really want to," she snapped. "You and Leo, you never make an effort. Ever. Noah looks up to you. Do you know that? He considers you his brother and sister, and you treat him like a stranger. It's selfish." "Maya, it's incredibly selfish." Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. It was the key that unlocked a door I had kept bolted shut for 15 years. And behind the door was a flood, a tidal wave of every buried memory, every silent scream, every moment of erasure and invalidation. The scratchy pink dress, the smell of new paint in my father's office, the last sad wave from my grandparents, the photo in the attic. It all came rushing back, not as a memory, but as a living, breathing rage. The careful, polite facade I had maintained for years crumbled into dust. My voice, when I finally spoke, was dangerously quiet. "Selfish. You want to talk about selfish. I don't have time for your dramatics, Maya. No, you're going to listen." I cut her off, the words pouring out of me, hot and unstoppable. "You want to know why I'm not coming to Noah's party? Because I am done. I am done pretending. I am done playing a part in this perfect little family you built on top of the wreckage of ours. That is a horrible thing to say. Is it? Is it horrible? Or is it the truth? You want to know when I stopped making an effort. It was the day you decided that Noah, little boy you just met, deserved the mother that Leo and I had just lost. It was the day you stood in a wedding dress 3 weeks after we buried our father and told us to smile for the camera. You didn't just move on, Mom. You bulldozed our past. You took our grandparents from us. You took our father's pictures off the wall. You scrubbed every trace of him, of us, from that house so you could have your shiny, new life. You didn't raise us. You curated us. And I am done pretending Noah is my brother when you stopped being my mother years and years ago. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I was breathing heavily, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had finally said it. All of it. Her voice, when it came, was ice. I gave you everything. A home, a stable family. Marcus was a better father to you than... Don't, I warned, my voice breaking. Don't you dare. She took a breath and delivered the final, cutting blow. The one she'd been holding in reserve for years. You know what, Maya? You are so full of bitterness and anger. You can't see the good things you have. Maybe you don't deserve to be a part of this family. And with that, she hung up. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in my hand, surrounded by a silence that was completely different from the one that had filled my childhood. That silence had been an absence. This one was a presence. It was the sound of a chain, rusted and heavy, finally snapping. It was the sound of freedom. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of silence. I didn't cry. I felt hollowed out, but clean. The anger was gone, replaced by a strange, quiet peace. I hadn't lost a mother. I had simply stopped pretending I had one. Then, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Hello. A woman's voice, hesitant and warm. Is this Maya? My name is Sophia Garcia. I'm your Aunt Sophia, your father's sister. My breath caught in my throat. Aunt Sophia. I vaguely remembered her from when I was very small. My parents and I, we've never forgotten about you and Leo, she continued, her voice thick with emotion. We tried, for a while. We sent letters, presents. They all came back, returned to sender. We knew your mother was keeping you from us. We didn't want to cause more trouble for you. So we just watched from a distance. We found you on social media a few years ago. We've been watching you grow up, waiting, praying, waiting for you to be old enough, for you to be ready. We didn't want to overstep. But your abuelo, he's not getting any younger, and he just wants to see his grandchildren. Tears streamed down my face. Hot, silent tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. We hadn't been forgotten. We hadn't been abandoned. We had been watched over, loved from afar. I called Leo immediately. He was silent for a long moment, and then I heard him take a shaky breath. When? Was all he asked. That Thanksgiving, for the first time in 15 years, we drove to our grandparents' house. The little bungalow looked exactly the same. I felt a tremor of fear. What if it wasn't how I remembered? What if the magic was gone? Then the door opened, and there they were. Abuela Elena, her hair now pure white, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles. Abuelo Miguel, leaning on a cane, but with the same fierce, loving eyes. I remembered my abuela just opened her arms, and I walked into them. I was 7 years old again, and 23 years old, all at once. The smell of her perfume, the soft fabric of her sweater, the way she whispered Mija, Mihija, into my hair. It was all real. Leo was right behind me, enveloped in a hug. From our grandfather, we walked inside, and it was like walking into the part of my own heart I thought had been amputated. There, on the wall, was a collage of photos, not just of our dad, but of us. School pictures we never knew they had. Candid shots from our public social media profiles. Me at my high school graduation. Leo with his arm around his girlfriend. They had built a shrine to the grandchildren they couldn't see. That afternoon, we didn't talk about my mother. We talked about my father. They told us stories we'd never heard. About his terrible teenage band. About the time he tried to build a rocket in the backyard. About how proud he was the day Leo was born. They showed us his old yearbooks, his report cards, his awful poetry. They gave us back our history. They filled the hollow spaces inside us with laughter and context and unconditional, unapologetic love. We ate turkey and stuffing and my abuela's arroz con ganjules. And for the first time since I was 7 years old, I felt completely and utterly full. I am at peace now. The anger is gone, fizzled out into a kind of distant pity for my mother. She built a fortress to protect herself from her own past, and in the end, all she did was trap herself inside. I no longer need her approval, her recognition, or even her love. I don't need to be a part of her family, because I have found mine. My family is my brother, who was my co-conspirator and my rock. It's my grandparents, who kept a candle lit for us in the window for 15 years. It's my Aunt Sophia, who became the bridge back to ourselves. It is the memory of my father, no longer sanitized or hidden away, but vibrant and present and real. Sometimes, I look in the mirror, not the shattered one from my past, but a real one, and I see my father's eyes looking back at me. I see my grandmother's smile. I see the resilient Leo and I forged in the fire. I am not a replacement. I am not a ghost. I am a Garcia. I am a survivor. And I am finally home.